Welcome, all you wiretappers out there. Welcome to Gangland Wire. I'm here in the studio, and we have via the magic of Skype our good friend Cam Robinson from Chicago. Welcome, Cam. It's good to have you back.
Glad to be back, Gary. I really enjoy it.
All right, good. Well, Cam has helped me a lot in doing this research because, folks, I am working on another documentary film about the Kansas City crime family. Just in real specific about the Carl and Nick Zavella, who were the brothers who really ran the family in Kansas City, and their war with three other brothers, Carl, Nick, and Joe, and four brothers, and their war with four other brothers, Carl, Nick, Joe, and Mike Sparrow. And it was a war to the death. And I've been working on that like crazy after I did my little Bonnie and Clyde tour through the South. As if you're listening to this or you're watching this and listening to it on Skype, on YouTube, why you will see the Bonnie and Clyde tour through the South with my good friend, retired Canine Sergeant Kate Kozel. We hit all the Bonnie and Clyde sites. I do want to thank somebody. I want to thank, oh God. I want to thank Michael McCollum for making a nice little donation. I really appreciate it. And don't forget to hit me up on your Venmo app, buy me a cup of coffee or a shot in a beer. You can always go to my PayPal, $25 or more, and you get a free copy of my DVD. And if you get on up there, and like my friend Mr. McCollum's going to get, he's going to get a book and a movie. So, there'll be some rewards if you give us a little money to help keep this thing going and pay the hosting fees, the Freedom of Information Act request fees, and those kinds of things. Cam, I don't know if you've done much of that or not. I just did one. I got a whole case file, and I shudder to think it's a story I'm really interested in, and it cost me $265. Yeah. But that was a whole case file from a trial that happened in another city. So it was, but there's a ton of good information in there.
Yeah, they give you a little bit, enough to whet your appetite, but when you really start getting into it, it does get expensive.
It gets expensive. I've got lots of times you can get 50 pages for free, I believe.
Yeah,
and I've done that several times. Have you done that?
Yeah, I have done it a couple times, and it seems like they give you just the beginning stuff and maybe the most redacted stuff.
Yeah, really, you'll have half a page redacted.
That's right.
That's a killer, isn't it? God, or there'll be a name redacted. It's like, damn, I wish I knew that name. Come on.
Make the one connection.
Yeah, really. But it's still some pretty good information. And I like it that you can get it digitally too. You don't have to get a whole pile of papers in the mail. Like they'll send me a CD-ROM with it already down on digitally. And I'm using those in this documentary I'm using those to make a picture of an individual piece of paper or an individual report. Just one page of it has some interesting information. Now I take that and I pull certain text out of it, and I can make it, expand on the screen whenever I get my documentary going. So we'll be talking about Nick Sparrow, the oldest Sparrow brother, getting a job with a truck line. And here's an interesting little story. He set up a load of liquor to be stolen. And then he turned around and went to his boss and said, hey, I noticed we lost this whole load of liquor. He said, I can get it back for you. And they said, well, that'd be great. So he got it back for them. And then as a reward, then they trusted him, and they raised him on up to be a supervisor. And he got in where he could get, more information about all upcoming loads. And guess what happened after that?
Give the keys of the kingdom, huh?
Yeah, he knew when and where everything was coming and going and what it was. And all of a sudden their theft started going up, and he wasn't getting any of those back for him. So
I can't help you with those. They're above my
Yeah, above my pay grade.
I wish I could. I'm not as good with the guys anymore. They don't trust management anymore.
And by the end, they had to pay him some money to get him to quit. He was in the union, and they paid him a bunch of money just so he'd quit. It was cheaper to pay him off.
Yeah.
Probably nothing like nothing like that ever happened in Chicago, did it? With a union Teamsters guy working on the dock in Chicago.
Labor is totally above the board here in Chicago. We don't. There's any corruption here with the Teamsters in Chicago.
I seem to remember that Harry Aileman killed that Billy Logan dude because he was a dispatcher at a truck line and he was refusing to parcel out some information to certain people. I don't know if that's true or not, but that was what.
Alan Dorfman was a straight shooter too.
Oh yeah, I got a little soundbite from Alan Dorfman. It says, you got to be in Las Vegas. You can't maneuver any fucking money unless you're in gambling.
just like Farmer, Roy, your guy,
Roy Williams, yeah.
Roy Williams, yeah. Yeah, he was another one. Yeah, the Teamsters were totally straight laced since Dave Beck.
It's amazing, yeah, Dave Beck. It's amazing. Jimmy Hoffa has another quote is. Morris Schenker out of St. Louis was being threatened by Joey Lombardo. And Schenker says, I did business with Hoffa. I only did business with Hoffa, and Hoffa said you went in on it, but I only did business with Hoffa. So, because Lombardo was trying to shake him down because he had gotten a big Teamsters loan. Now Hoffa's gone, and he's not kicking back regularly like he's supposed to out of his, I think it was the Aladdin casino that he had. I can't remember for sure. So, you get in bed with those guys, you ain't never going to let you out. No. Ever.
No.
And that Teamsters union got in bed with them back in the day. It started right after the war here in Kansas City. All right, folks, today we're going to talk about Raymond L.S. Patriarca of Providence, Rhode Island, and the, what do you call that? Do you call that the New England crime family, the Providence, Rhode Island crime family? How do you describe that? They
called it the Office. The Patriarchas called themselves the Office. These different groups had different names. Like Detroit was called the Partnership. Chicago was obviously the Outfit. New England, the Patriarchas called themselves the Office. Buffalo called themselves the Arm. Different groups had their own names for what they were. I don't know if they thought it added some respectability or if they just wanted to differentiate themselves. But the Patriarchas called themselves the Office.
And Kansas City, they called themselves the Clique, which is a little known name. It never really hit the news, but they called themselves. If you knew somebody that was involved, they would say they called themselves the Clique.
Huh. I'll add that to my list. It's not like I know what I'm talking about.
Really? Hardly anybody knows that, so they won't believe you anyhow. I only know it because I interviewed an old-time mobster when he's on his deathbed, and he kept talking about the Clique. Finally, I said, "What do you mean the Clique?" He said, "The boys, the guys. You know what I mean." He wouldn't say anymore, but that's what he meant was the mob in Kansas City. Yeah. So, you made a point to me as we were discussing this. You sent me some documents on this. I thought it was really interesting about the Patriarca family stands alone. They were not really under anybody else. Kansas City really and Milwaukee are really under Chicago in many ways. Like Nick Savella kicked up money that he didn't have to Joey Iupa in Chicago out of his own personal casino scheme. So we were really under them, and some of these other crime families, I believe Philadelphia was under Carlo, the Gambino family.
And Angelo Bruno was sort of nominated for power under the Gambinos, and originally they ran Atlantic City, but once the five families wanted in, Philadelphia couldn't hang on, so Nicky Scarfo kind of gave it up, and so Philadelphia couldn't hang on to anything that New York wanted, and Cleveland gave up to the Genovese family. They were dependent on them, and they were repped on the commission by the Genovese. You see some of the farther out families like the Marcellos. They kind of did their own thing, but they were so far away from anybody. The Traficantes and the Marcellos, they didn't really have to deal with anybody because they were isolated. But the Patriarchas were in the middle of the action right there in New England, between Boston and Rhode Island and into Connecticut, as we'll talk about in a future show. And they ran their own program. They had a few dealings with the Genovese in western Massachusetts, but they had their own dealings. And if anybody wanted to move into Rhode Island or move into Boston, they had to get permission. They couldn't operate on Patriarca territory without getting permission in Boston from Jerry Angulo, and in Rhode Island from Raymond Patriarca. They were not dependent on any of the other families. They definitely stood their own ground, and they had a lot of men, and they commanded the same respect from New York as they would give to one another, and as the five families would give to each other.
Interesting. I got it. Brings to mind a question: is Boston and Providence, Rhode Island, now geographically they're real close?
Yeah.
And the as we call it, as I've heard it called in the media, I believe, is the New England mob or New England crime family. So Angelo, and I read that he was like the boss in Boston for a long time, but he was actually an underboss in the Patriarca family. Is that what you're saying?
Originally, New England was split up among a bunch of different groups. There were little Sicilian groups all over the place. When Raymond Patriarca took over in the early 50s, around 54, he really set about gathering everybody under a single group. He was sort of the Iron Fist, and he gathered every group together. He sent guys to Boston, and he took over. There was an older guy named Joey Lombardo, just like the guy in Chicago, but he pretty much ran the whole area. When Patriarca took over, he got this guy Joey Lombardo's blessing, and he really got everybody's under the same roof. He took over for an older guy, Morello, who had fled to Sicily. He got Boston under his control, and he gathered everybody in the area between the two states under one moniker, and he ran it as one group. But he recognized that Boston was sort of its own location. It was a big city. He stayed in a little place in Providence, Rhode Island. Federal Hill was their Little Italy. He ran a little coin laundry called the Coinomatic, and so he set it up so his underboss would be in charge of Boston, but would recognize Raymond Patriarca as the boss. Originally, it was Harry Tamleo, and then Jerry Angulo came along. He was running a gambling empire, a couple million a year, but he was not a made guy. He was getting every mob guy was coming up to Angulo and extorting money off of him. So he gave Patriarca $50,000 and promised him an extra $100 a year if Patriarca would make him a made guy, so these other guys would leave him alone. So Patriarca made him. Jerry Angulo never had to kill anybody or any the old school way of getting your bones. And so Jerry Angulo became a made guy by buying his way in. And he eventually was given Boston. He was making more money than anybody else. So Patriarca, it was kind of a brilliant move, and showed sort of the planning a lot of these old guys have. Like you've shown with Nick Savella, that sort of that Machiavellian thinking that we've talked about. He had Boston under their own umbrella, but kicking up to him because he held the real power. But having the underboss in Boston and having himself stationed in Providence as the head, he really was able to control that much territory, and that gave him the strength to sort of keep New York out and also keep the Irish gangs in line. That was a big thing in Boston, but Patriarca was able to control them by having so much territory and keeping it divided that way.
Interesting. So now the Irish gangs in Boston, that had to be a big deal. Of course, Whitey Bulger and the Winter Hill Gang and all that. And they had some Italians involved with them. That was it. Stephen the Rifleman Flemmy. He was Italian, but they kind of morphed across lines a little bit off ethnic lines. But I don't think now the office probably did not go across ethnic lines. Somehow they kept the power over the Irish guys. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, guys. The Irish guys had a lot of wars. They had some wars in the 50s, and then later on in the late 60s. Guys like Stephen Flemmy and John Martirano, the butcher of I can't remember what he was the butcher of. He was a damn butcher or something. He killed a hell of a lot of people.
He killed a bunch of people. There's a 60 Minutes interview of him. I've seen it on Facebook. I mean on YouTube. So
he was good friends with Ed Bradley. They went to college together.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Maybe it was high school. I don't know if Martirano was college. I don't know if he was
probably high school.
Hell, it was probably elementary school. I don't know.
He was the undereducated or white male, right? Right. They used to talk about
as the Oxford jacket sort, but Martirano and Flemmy had a lot of mob connections. They were the children of Italian immigrants, so they could mix with that crowd. Yeah. And that sort of gave the Irish mobs the sort of little bit of clout, and that really helped out Whitey Bulger in his rise, gave him a little bit of information into Angiulo. But yeah, the Irish mobs definitely kicked up to the Italians. They understood, and Whitey Bulger even said you didn't use the name Angiulo, and Kevin Weeks has commented on this too. You didn't throw around the name Angiulo. Just you didn't say their names. You understood that the Italians were the real power. They didn't mess with the Irish per se, but they did get their cut. But there weren't too many problems between them as long as they maintained their separate identities, and they did do some cross business, and like I said, Fleming and Martirano had connections, but yeah, they maintained pretty separate identities.
So in some of your research, I was noticing that they really were kind of heavy into porn back in the day, back in what would this been like the late 70s and early 80s, when there was still some money in it. Now it's before the internet, pre-internet. Internet took all the money out of porn. I know a kid here in Kansas City that he made about 20 grand in 1 month doing some porn stuff. And he was from a good family. I knew his dad really well. And he came to me for some advice. And he said, yeah, I've got out of it. He said, it's just too dirty, but that's how much money you can make in this. It's amazing how much money is in porn. But the mob had it locked down before the internet hit, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. The Gambinos had total control of the porn. Robert DiBernardo, who was he owned. They say he ran porn from New York to L.A. He was in charge of it all. He ran what you think of as sort of normal porn. When you Roy DeMeo was known for the alternative porn, we'll call it. I think I've read some stuff where he was distributing some bestiality stuff, and Paul Castellano didn't like that, and Gaggi, who was the capo, he wasn't too keen on it, but they were making so much money that they would turn a blind eye to some of the strange shit, because Roy DeMeo was not discerning in how he made his money. I mean, he'd do whatever to turn and made a lot of money. So the Gambinos, whatever end of the porn spectrum you found wherever your interests lie, whether it was sort of the more tame stuff, or if you were, I don't know, way the hell out there, the Gambinos had you covered. and they reached out. DiBernardo had some connections. The Patriarchas did allow a porn distributor, a guy named Kenneth Gorino, to be their Gambino porn representative throughout New England, and he was doing. He was busted in 80, 83, I think it was, and it was millions of dollars worth of porn that he was a $3 million a year porn ring in Rhode Island. I mean, before the internet, we know how big the internet porn ring has gotten now, but before that took off, there were movie theaters, there were magazines, there were all manner of things, and it was big business. I mean, it was porn was a huge money maker.
Yeah, they had the peep shows and just the dirty movie theaters, all kinds of different books and magazines.
And all those guys paid the mob. If you that's all Times Square was back in the day. And if you ran one of those places, the mob was getting their cut. They ran it. They owned it.
Yeah.
If you were making porn, if you were distributing, if you were making movies, if you were showing movies, if you were selling books, the mob wanted their cut. Here in Chicago, that was a big thing. Frank Calabrese Jr. talked about going around and making collections for his father at all the area porn shops. I think Red Wimette, who you talked to, he had a porn shop, didn't he? Or he was
he was making big money, and Frank Sweets was collecting a piece of that. You couldn't. Right. He said that you couldn't operate without kicking up to the outfit. If you were anywhere around all the great, really all gray market businesses, or over into black market businesses, whether it be gambling, pornography, prostitution, trying to think of some others. We even had a gray market drug thing going here in Kansas City where they were overstating the number of nursing home beds that several nursing homes they had control of actually had, and then they could order all kinds of pharmaceuticals at a big discount because they were going to a nursing home. There's some kind of a deal in the federal statutes that you can do that, and they can't charge you full price for what would normally be to a nursing home, and they get a big discount. Then they were turning around and shipping them out to independent pharmacies and selling them. So any gray area business, the mob's going to get a piece of it.
Yeah, Fradiano put together a faulty dentistry ring for the Teamsters. Submitting false claims to dentistry and putting together some connected dentists, and they would submit false claims to the Teamsters Insurance Fund and give a kickback to the dentist for submitting false claims, and then collect the money for the false dentistry work that had gone through. I mean, these guys are awful damn. They believe in free market capitalism.
They do. You got to grant them that. And the amount of money is amazing. So they had there was some kind of a problem with the Genovese family, or was it Gambino family in New York during these years?
The Genoveses they did have a branch in Western Pennsylvania in Springfield, Massachusetts. It was run by a guy named Sam Cafari, and he had a lieutenant, Carlo Mastrototaro. Say that 5 times fast.
That's a tongue twister there, man.
In Worcester, Massachusetts. And Mastrototaro split a porn shop with Jerry Angiulo. And it was the only porn shop in Worcester, Massachusetts. And it was run by these two brothers, Joseph and Tommy Palladino. And they owed Jerry Angiulo $20,000 in gambling debts. And they ran book out of the store. So Mastrototaro hooks up. He's a Genovese guy. He hooks up with this Kenneth Gorino, who runs porn for the Gambinos. And they get together. Gorino says, hey, my capo, a guy named DiBernardo, the Gambino porn guy, will distribute extra porn to us, and we can set up a second shop in Worcester and split the business. So Master Totaro, he says, well, then I'll have part in 2 different porn businesses, so I'll get double the money I'm getting from Jerry Angiulo. So now we've got Sam Cafari, who's a Genovese capo, and Robert DiBernardo, Gambino capo, who are supplying 2 of their lieutenants who have now agreed to let their 2 lieutenants operate in territory that is split between the Genovese and the Patriarchas. It's Patriarca territory. They allow the Genovese to work there. So this Palladino, who runs Jerry Angiulo's porn shop, says, hey, they've opened up another store. This is going to cut our business in half. They're making about $3,500, $4,000 a week. They're going to cut our business in half. That's going to be your money cut in half, and I can't pay you the additional $2,000 that I pay you, the VIG that I'm paying you on the loan. So Jerry Angiulo at the time was the underboss for the Genovese. I mean, for the shit, all these damn spaghetti names. So this basically Patriarca capo is mad because a Genovese capo and a Gambino capo are cutting his business in half. Yeah. This is 2 New York families reaching into Rhode Island territory and cutting their business in half by setting up a second porn shop. And
it's kind of like you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, and which is pretty much the standard operating procedure for these guys.
I can make a damn simple story more complicated. I can stretch some shit out.
Well, it's there's just so much money. It's interesting that they see it as open another store is taking business away, when in fact what anybody that knows anything about the free market system realizes that you just open up another store, you just create more demand. It's easier to get to for more people, and everybody, a rising tide lifts all boats. But these mob guys, they never think, doesn't seem like they never think like that. They never think beyond give me mine and don't anybody get involved here.
It's a pissing contest. It becomes a sign of disrespect. And, the Palladino, the guy who worked for Angiulo, the Patriarcha boss, he went and talked to this Genovese capo and said, you're getting into our business. And basically the Genovese capo said, get fucked. I don't care. I'm above you. I'm going to do what I want to do. You're just a street guy. Get out of my face. This Palladino goes back and tells Angiulo, I talked to him. He said he's going to do what he wants to do.
But that didn't set well with our friend Jerry Angiulo.
Jerry Angiulo was madder than hell. He yelled at his guy for going and talking to another guy on his behalf. He said, what are you talking to somebody in another family? I own you, and you don't talk to anybody without my permission. Second off, he doesn't want to do what he considers it sharing his revenue. He says he'll split revenue in his store with this guy, with this other capo, because they own it together. But he's not letting him set up another store in his territory without his permit. That's not doing it. He says, well, then I'll get a quarter of the revenue. I'm not doing that. And he considers it disrespect being shown in his territory by both the Gambinos for supplying the porn and the Genoveses for setting up the shop to begin with. So he's got these 2 interloping families stepping on his territory, showing him disrespect, and for talking to his guy to begin with. He's madder than hell at these families, and at his guy, Angiulo's an unpleasant guy to begin with. Hell, most of these mobsters are not guys you'd have over to Sunday dinner anyway.
Yeah.
So he's not happy with the situation as it has presented itself.
Wouldn't he have to take this up to Patriarca to get some kind of resolution? Anything that he did with the other families that became a dispute, he'd have to go to Patriarca and try to get Patriarca involved.
That's likely what has happened. Now Angiulo says we know there was a bug set up in Angiulo's headquarters for a long time. that was based on, you know, Whitey Bulger had told the FBI where his headquarters was. The FBI set up a bug there, and it was there for a while. So we have a lot of FBI recordings of what Angiulo said. So Angiulo was yelling at his guy, and he said, "I'm going to go talk to this Sam Kafari, the big boss of the Genoveses in the area, and I'm going to get him straightened out." We know he did that, and he wanted satisfaction. And when that didn't seem to satisfy him, he said he was going to escalate it further. We don't know exactly what happened beyond that point. That was in the beginning of 1980. That was about April or May of 1981. I'm sorry. That was around February of 1981. So in April of 81, the Gambino guy supplying the porn, he was arrested on this $3 million porn ring. In November of 81, the Master Totaro, he was involved in a court case targeting organized crime, and he was imprisoned. But the porn shop was closed down in December. There were other people running it, but it was closed down between November and December. Now, it seems to me that the only reason they would close it down is because somebody had ordered it to be closed. I mean, there were other people who could have run it, and these guys go to jail all the time, and their businesses don't close down, and their men don't just shut down shop. I mean, they run business from prison all the time. And this guy was only in prison for 18 months. He didn't just give up all his rackets. So the evidence seems to point to some sort of meeting occurred, probably with Patriarca and the higher ups in the families, and the shop was closed down, and Jerry Angiulo's shop stayed open, and
so it sounds like Angiulo
got his way.
He got his way. He got his way probably only because of Patriarca and the respect Absolutely. That he had and the fear of him that they had.
Yeah, it was Patriarca territory. And I think that the Genoveses were making so much other money that one little porn shop was not, in as much as it generated good revenue, it was not worth jeopardizing everything else that they had in the area. It was not worth the kind of conflict it would bring. Angiulo had a hell of a temper, and so did Patriarca, and it was worth maintaining good relations in what was basically Patriarca territory, and which goes to what we were talking about before with the Patriarchas existing on their own. The Genoveses understood that, and they operated in Patriarca territory under Patriarca rules. They closed down this porn shop because they were told they had to. It seems to me, we don't have any evidence except that it did close down.
Yeah, well, the proof's in the pudding, as they say. I would say probably they did. Right. And Paul Castellano was the head of the Gambino family at that point in time, and he was a guy. He wasn't really a street guy. He was a guy that would want to make a deal and weigh the the risk and the reward of anything that you did. That's always interesting if you can ever get wiretaps on them or bugs and hear them weighing the risk and reward. Now, the lower end guys, they don't think about the risk. They only think about the reward. The bosses will think about the risk.
Yeah. That and there seems to be a divide between guys who are more street guys and guys who are more business guys, and this DiBernardo was more of the head Gambino porn guy was more of a business guy, and he was later killed by Gotti and Sammy the Bull Gravano.
No, he was one of Sammy's people.
Yeah, and like you said, Paul Castellano was more of a business guy, and he made a lot of decisions on the long-term business aspects. It doesn't mean that they're not rough and tumble and willing to make executive decisions on whether or not somebody's going to live, but they had the long-term thinking.
Yeah.
Like probably more a lot like Savella,
Yeah.
Nick Savella versus Carl.
His brother Carl. Yeah, that's part of this movie I'm working on. That we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah.
Carl was more or less go out and kill them all, and a guy that was a friend of his. I got one. Here's a classic statement. It was on a wiretap, or actually, it was in a hidden microphone. They're talking about getting this other guy who has people around him, and Willie Comisano was Carl Savella's good friend, and Carl's telling Nick, he said, well, Willie said that we got to take off the limbs before we can get to the trunk. And what he meant was kill off all the guys, friends and people in his organization, and then we'll get to him. So that was his kind of thing. And Nick was more, can't we make a deal? Here's what Nick did, is another typical sophisticated kind of way, Machiavellian way might, one of these bosses like Patriarca might work is these Sparrow brothers were mad at him, and they floated a rumor out there that their oldest brother was killed by an old fall partner of his who had just gotten killed himself. And so, well, how convenient, Curly Mitts does some time after doing a job with Nick Sparrow. Nick Sparrow gets killed, and then Curly Mitts a few years later gets killed. And then they float out the rumor, well, Curly Mitts is the one that killed Nick. And so you guys, it wasn't us. We took care of him.
Water under the bridge. We took care of Curly Mitts for you, Nicky. Yeah. It's all good.
Yeah, it's all good now. Didn't work, but that's what I love about these guys is they're not just you got the hammer and the mallets out there, the sledgehammers, but you got the scalpels out there too, and the scalpels are what makes it fun to learn about and work on.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
Interesting. All right, Cam, it's been a heck of a story. I guess DiBernardo ended up getting killed. Internet came in and pretty much did away with the local porn business. Mob guys, and they had to get more sophisticated and figure out how to get on the internet and control that. And there's no way you're going to control the internet when like some little young guy, 20-some-year-old guy here in Kansas City can jump on a website that's owned by somebody in another country and film some stuff and provide people for live sex acts and that kind of thing on the internet and make 20 grand a month. They can't control that. There's no way they can control that.
No.
So the end of I have to talk to Red Wimet about the end of the porn business one of these days. He probably has some thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think that, mob guys have done some trading schemes on, with the market and different things online, but they don't have the sophistication to do too much.
Not to control it like they like to do it like they were doing back then. They wanted to control it. No. We had a guy in Kansas City who really stayed way, way back, and a guy named Morris Klein. He had been a gambler and been involved with the mob, Jewish guy, but he'd been really close in with Nick Savella for a long time. And then he kind of backed off, and you just never saw him anywhere. But eventually we find out that he's all involved in porn. But really was, there were some porn shops in Kansas City. It was more outside of Kansas City, and we had one little crew, a couple of guys got into it trying to gather information, and they'd get the books and the movies and bring them in and then write down the specific acts that might be pornographic. Oh, it was a filthy business. and nobody really gave a shit about it in the end. So no cases ever came out of it. I think nobody really cared.
It's not hurting anyone. What people do in the comfort of their confinement.
Comfort in their own home, really. Now, mob guys were making money off of that. Kind of makes it worthwhile to go after, because then they turn around and use that money to bribe people and do other things with. So that's the only reason it would be worth it.
Yeah.
They were too removed from it here in Kansas City. They were hooked up. They were connected to it. They were getting money off of it. They were pretty far removed. That's another thing about Nick Savelli. Any kind of business that was dirty, narcotics or pornography or prostitution, anything like that, he never got involved at all. I mean, he wasn't above ordering a murder, wasn't above doing one himself, but he liked to stick with gambling and fencing and loan sharking and those kinds of activities, and providing services to people that they wanted and that just weren't so dirty, shall we say. So,
just a simple guy who owned a meat market, wasn't he?
Just a very simple man. You're right. Partners in a meat market with Al Brandenmeyer.
Al Brandenmeyer.
All right. Well, this has been a good show, Cam. I appreciate it. And folks, if you have a friend or relative who has a problem with drugs or alcohol, make your first call to First Call. Call 816-361-5900 or go to their website, www.firstcallkc.org. Now, if you are interested in the Kansas City crime family, you need to rent my movie on Amazon, Gangland Wire. It tells the story, the backstory behind the movie Casino, the story of how the Kansas City, Chicago, Cleveland, and Milwaukee mobs conspired to skim really millions of dollars over the years from several casinos in Las Vegas. Also have the Kansas City Mob Tour app. You can take a mob tour of Kansas City with pictures and maps and text and videos. I think it's even linked up to my podcast from anywhere in the United States or anywhere in the world with a simple little app off the Apple Store. I have the podcast. Let's see, what else do I have? Don't I have something else I'm selling, Cam?
Got your documentary you're working on.
I'm working on this documentary. That'll be out here within about, I got to have it done by November. We're going to do a film festival in November again, and I want to have a new movie for it. My partner in that, Terrence, he has in his possession a old VHS tape from the 70s by a guy that was under a murder contract and had left town. He snuck back into town, and he and a friend of his took the old VHS camcorder and drove around and took pictures or shot video of different places in Kansas City. And he talked about different crimes that had happened at different places and who had done them. And there was no real big reveals, but it's interesting stuff. So we're going to show that one, and I might have my movie ready to go and probably get Bill Owsley to come over and maybe do a talk or something. And then a year from now, in June, we're going to have the Mob Summit 2020. We've had one in 2018 in Las Vegas. We had one in 2019 in Hot Springs at the Gangster Museum down there. And I've been talking with Larry Henry, my friend from Fayetteville, who was originally a Las Vegas newsman. And he wants to have it in Kansas City, and I'm on board with it. So I've been working on that. We'll more details will be revealed about that. I'm just starting to take a look at it and see how much money it's going to cost. That's the main thing, is how much money is it going to cost. All right. You got any parting words of wisdom here, Cam?
No, I just, there's not as much money in porn as there used to be. So, listeners need to keep that in mind as far as career options. But I had a great time. And as always, Gary, thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you, Cam. Good night. Good night, folks.